Welcome everyone to our second webinar. I am Sijin Huang, co-organizer of TEDxEcublens. And today I will have the pleasure to be your host on another interesting topic on how to deal with the novel coronavirus situation that is affecting us right now. So last time we talked a bit about disruption. We talked about how to lead through that disruption. And so what we concluded is that we really needed a growth mindset. And today we will go a bit further. We won't stay in the personal realm of leadership. We will go a bit more global. We will look at the economy and businesses, global supply chains, and how they really are impacted by this virus. So we are glad to have Amin, Dr. Amin Kaboli today with us. Welcome, Amin. He's a lecturer at EPFL, and he will be giving us some insights regarding the global supply chain. So thank you, Amin, for joining us today. We will be talking about businesses and supply chain recovery today, but to start, I think it's best to talk a bit more about the devil itself, to talk a bit more about the virus. So in Beijing, in Switzerland, like these days, we were talking a lot about the virus is something of the past, we are reopening everything. But at the same time, the numbers recently, they have gone up. Like in Switzerland, the numbers have gone tripled, I think, something like that. In Beijing, there are new clusters. So what can we really make of it? What can we expect?
Thank you for the question. It's a very good question. Look, we have two cases in New Zealand recently, in this week, and 130 cases in different clusters, but basically in Beijing, and then lockdown near the cluster in Beijing. I haven't heard anything about Switzerland or haven't seen anything yet, but you tell me. But generally, look, we are not done with the first wave. So the second wave is quite likely to happen if people, they're coming out of their places, they go to the work and acting like nothing happened, acting like not respecting the social distancing.
Yeah, a lot of people do that, actually.
Exactly. Then quite likely, because this virus is there, okay, to some level decreased, but then the infection rate is very high. One example is this, that in South Korea, patient 31, sometime between January 19 to February 18, for example, they have 31 patients. So that patient 31 participated in a large gathering. And by mid-April, South Korea, despite all of the constant testing and monitoring, turned to 10,500. So it is exponential, let's say, the infection. What is very, very important in this is that we consider the wave, because China was epicenter, then South Korea and Japan, Iran, and then later Europe, then moved to United States. Right now is South Asia and Americas, they're infected, and we have like near to 1 million cases there. So things are moving, but this doesn't mean this wave is done. There's not going to be any other. And this, let's say, back and forth waves going to have huge impact in our different economy and our global supply chain.
Yeah, I see. And so regarding this virus, what can we expect, like from short term to long term, on those coming days? What can we expect to read about on this? How do we really go out of that crisis, for example?
Well, the way out of crisis is something, I mean, how virus going to react or how virus going to mutate, we don't know anything. And I'm not a virologist or epidemiologist. But one thing here is that there are 2 or 3, let's say, scenarios and approaches to come out. First is, number one is, for the short term, definitely social distancing would help and support, and definitely like sneezing on the bended elbow or washing the hand constantly. If you're exposed with some other people, definitely having face mask if it is closed area or so on. So definitely this is in short term, and definitely mid-term would help. Mid-term is, I would say, like probably contact tracing. There are some applications coming out efficiency of that is questionable. For example, in Qatar, they released it, and within one day, that huge security bug, that personal information was like exposed to many other people, like dark web and all of the hackers. Second point is like in Norway, for example, they pulled it off. It's not anymore available because of personal privacy. In Switzerland, I've seen they are like using a platform of Google and Apple.
Yes.
Anyway, the data is stored in their, let's say, data centers. Then France has started to stop COVID. Italy is going for a kind of pilot program. So, and then South Korea, for example, they use very efficiently, but then they changed the regulation after Mars. They learn, they changed the regulation. So here is questionable. You know, you're trading off your personal data and privacy for the public health and good. So it's good, but you know, it's just a personal choice, I would say.
Yeah,
Longer term, let's say, choice or solution would be to come out of this situation. I would say is vaccine and medicine and drugs, for example. Dexamethasone came like 2 days ago. They announced that dexamethasone is out. Of course, it's not a new drug. It's 60 years been there. There was another medicament for Ebola. I don't remember exactly the name. And then vaccine, there are many platforms, like a couple of platforms right now they submitted. But one thing that is important there is that it takes 10 to 12 months at least to get, even 12 to 18 months if you want to be conservative. It takes to go to the mass production and make this vaccine available for people. And overall, there is no one magical and miracle or solution, rather than we have to mix them up. And in this period of time, we have to consider it the same as after AIDS outbreak, like protecting ourselves. These days, definitely the situation is like after World War and then the absence of antibiotic. So people, they should really take care of themselves, and the fatality rate is not the same as the antibiotic, not having antibiotic, but or infection at that level. But still, what is very important is like personal responsibility and social responsibility. So these three, I would say, categories of solution to come out of this situation.
Yes, definitely. That's what a lot of government has been trying to do, I think, with relative success that we still have to see in the future. And so all these governments actually, in these recent years, for example, has been a wave of globalization as well. And those governments, those countries, they have been tied together, kind of. And one example I can think of is really China. Like China, it's like a huge manufacturer. And recently we've heard a lot about problems coming out from the supply chain out of China.
Yeah.
They have been the epicenter of the virus, but now they are more. Like they're definitely more on a world scale. So what's your view, for example, on that, like on their situation, how they have impacted the world?
Look, this is part of the globalization, and part of it is our interlink and interdependency to China. And that goes because of two main factors. The first one is because China is the second largest economy of the world. To give you a perspective, like companies in the United States, like Tiffany & Co. Has 36 or 37% market share there in China, Hong Kong, and Macau, if you would put all together as one big cluster. Boeing 7%, Nike 16 to 17%, Apple 17%, for example. Swiss watch industry, I'm talking about the whole watch industry, and in China and Hong Kong together, cumulative, near 30% market share. So it's a player from the market side. And the other point is in 70s, after 70s, there was a kind of global decision to go for a kind of factory of the world. So that model, sorry, my light is with the sensor. So that model has changed, like 50s, 60s, mainly we had a kind of model that it was locally produced, like in UK, United States, like so Ford, for example, Toyota in Japan, they produced it and then they shipped it with the tariff and so on. But all has been done domestically. Then in 70, they decided to just move to China, but not with the simple part, not like the full package. And later in 90s, it moved with the full package. And 2000 and on, what happened is that China joined 2001, I believe, to WTO, and it became like massive exporter. So they leveraged the money that they earned, and they knew that this competitiveness is not going to stay that long. So they leveraged this way that they invested highly on the high-tech industry, and they put the focus on the domestic market as well, because they have huge market already. So these two brought a lot of, let's say, connection and built a lot of stories here, okay? So if we're going to consider just a logistic from China to Europe or United States, by average is like 30 days. So imagine one, like I think it's January 25th, it was Chinese New Year, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. And then after that, like it was a lockdown and so on. So definitely it impacted, and it created this lockdown, created a kind of supply shock for the world economy, right?
Yeah.
From the other side, what we experienced is that lockdown in other regions created demand shock. When we were not outside, we didn't buy, we didn't consume much. Like it was different, essential products basically. So when we don't consume much, we don't invest much, or the investment is uncertain. And this brings lack of fun for many companies. So if you see, they're all interlinked to each other. And what we experienced with China and globally was just a mixture of supply shock and demand shock. Demand shock, definitely, you know, in the literature basically is coined by bullwhip effect. If we call supply shock as a reverse bullwhip effect, it was just like both together and definitely impacted a lot of, let's say, businesses, and will continue to impact.
Yeah, definitely. China being like one of the biggest customer and one of the biggest producer, it's like they have the both positions actually. So that's really, really interesting. And so what I was thinking is then we have the globalization, right? We have outsourcing and everything, and there are risks that came from such operations. But there are also a lot of risks that we already know about, right? Like there are other risks that, for example, what I think about is Trump, for example, with his tariffs and everything.
Yeah, tariff wars is one of them, sure. Look, political instability is one risk for global supply chain. Tariff wars or trade wars is one of them. Look, all of like these two clusters, basically, or categories, they're on our hand. Really, it's more on the negotiation, leadership, talking, and knowing how to get things done in a win-win situation, not necessarily I win and the others lose. But the third part, I would call like natural disasters, the same as like volcano in Iceland or in the flood in Thailand, tsunami in Japan. If you consider all like these categories together, right? This is out of our hand. Might be like to some degree in our hand by global, let's say, global warming and the climate. But definitely this is out of our hand directly, let's call it out of our hand. So the classical, let's say, way to, or traditional approach or tools in supply chain is, okay, have demand accuracy and then go for cost cutting, have lean management in place or lean manufacturing in place, outsource, good. But that works for some known events. For unknown events like Corona, like volcano, which is like the likelihood is so small, but but the impact is massive. So for this kind of cases, we don't have any data. We have some documented experience probably, but we don't have like historical data, sales data or shipment data or so on. So this is the time that it distinguishes mature supply chain or mature companies in their global business or global supply chain and immature.
Yeah, I see. So yeah, it really depends on the companies and how they really approach that, because we know that there is a lot of things that is not prepared by any of the companies. We have seen that companies are going towards lean manufacturing a lot, and then some of them has been beaten like from the back because they have gone lean, but they are not prepared for the corona. So
sure. Look,
that's a lot of what we see.
In the lean, basically what we consider is like plus minus 20% of disruption or variation. I mean, the main concept of lean is creating flow and removing any kind of, let's say, variance in the operations, right? So if 20% minus 20% plus minus 20%, we consider this variation. But if you consider what happened in the supply chain now, I bring some example. The demand for personal protective equipment, for example, in UK, was like that normally NHS, the National Health System, so they provide for 233, I guess, centers. It turned to, demand turned to, out of the other hospitals and centers and trusts, turned to 5,000, near to 800. So this is like 26 times above, right? We're not talking here about 20%. We're talking about like some thousand persons. Okay, so of course it's out of the blue, just comes there. How we can deal with that? Having some safety buffer, thinking more about resilience rather than efficiency. I mean, majority of supply chain in global, let's say, business model, we're looking more on the efficiency, cost cutting, right? Outsourcing. Many companies, you will be surprised to know, but majority of the companies, they have, they don't know many of their second or third tier suppliers. Majority of companies. Honestly, this is not a joke. I mean, how you can manage something is a very old saying. You manage thing when you measure it or when you know it. When we have a lot of unknown in our network of supply chain, a value-adding network, and we don't know who's the second tier, third tier, and what is their location? Are they in Mexico, or they're in Thailand, or they're in China, in Wuhan, for example? 500 main manufacturers, they were there, first tier or second tier. And many companies in the middle of March, they reached to the point that, oh my God, we don't have enough supply. You see what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
And like there are these kind of companies. We are, in the cases, mainly we are looking at Amazon, Apple, everything is good, rosy, perfect. This is not the case. They're not all the manufacturing or all the global supply chain. There are good cases, but we have a lot of mediocre cases as well.
Yeah, that's a lot of what comes from the globalization. We see that you talk about demand shock, about supply shock. That's kind of thing we see on not on a daily basis. So like with the corona, it has just been amplified so much, and there are so many industries that are touched by it. Do you have some ideas of the amplitude or let's say the kind of industry that are most impacted by this situation?
Yeah, I do have. Before going for cases, like number of cases, what I want to really highlight here is that, look, the demand shock that we talked about, supply shock, and combination of both of them, it creates a kind of tornado here in supply chain, in a network of supply chain, global supply chain, that is really going to be out of the hand of even experts knowing how to manage it. Okay. And only companies would survive with a solid balance sheet and a strong cash flow. And overall, lack of, like, this demand shock means not consuming, not buying. Look, in the parentheses, I'm not promoting consumerism. What I'm saying, like normal consumption that we have. So if we see all of this, overall is going to impact on the industry level and on the economy. So the economy going to be shrinking. Like global GDP, suppose it was estimated to be 2.7%, the growth of GDP. So it became minus 3% so far, which means near to -1, right?
Yeah.
So this means all companies like UK, France, Italy, there are OECD companies, there are countries, they are like contracted like by minus 11% so far. Q2 gonna come like in 2 weeks. We're gonna have a lot of reports, financial reports by the companies and aggregated level of the economy. And I personally expect like first or second week of July, we see and we hear a lot of surprising news. I hope positive, but definitely this is just false hope. We are hearing.
I think the stock market is going wild probably after the after Q2.
Yeah. If you see a stock market is going up, because the stock market looks about the future. You see what I mean? There were like a stimulus there, packages by the government, they put it there, and definitely the hope should be there to come out, to invest, to work. But look, when there is uncertainty about like taking the flight, how we can expect to be back to normal. So if I want to go now to your question about the cases in supply chain, well, the first and foremost is demand shock in oil market. Oil industry heavily had to cut. OPEC sat together. Definitely they had a lot of issue between Saudi Arabia and Russia. Finally, they reached all together, though Russia is out of OPEC, but anyway, it's non-member, but they are deciding all together because the demand was, the supply was higher and definitely the price drops. So they decided to cut like, but in April, May, I think 10 million barrels per day, 9 point something, we can round it up to 10 million barrels. And for the second half of the year, 6 million barrels per day. So that's one part. Second point, for example, in UK, fruit picking is like needs this in this, let's say market, this needs industry, let's call it, needs 80,000 people. They just had 30 people, 30%, sorry. So if you see all of them near to 24,000 people available, the rest should have come from Eastern European countries or somewhere else, cross the border and go. Lockdown didn't let anybody to move, right? So that was another point. There are many cases, reported cases from UK, from US, for example, dairy products that had to just chuck it. Eggs, instead of hatching it, they broke it. Like farmers, they've done that. There are other cases such as, it's a very interesting case, US and Canada mainly in this, like their industry, their agricultural industry needs pollination. And they need beekeepers from Australia, China, Chile. Normally they bring these people there and then there are like beekeepers and then all around and then this pollination happens. This can have a massive impact on the year to come on the agriculture for UK, United States and Canada. Other case that could come to my mind is, well, Airbnb. There was very low demand for Airbnb. People basically, they were at their own apartment. They didn't go or they canceled. Though it's a controversial case about how Airbnb took care of the homeowners and basically supported more clients for the cancellation. Airbnb injected 2 billion so far, cut 25% of their employees, and they wanted to go to IPO, initial public offering, in this year, in 2020, and the valuation of the company was something like near to 32 billion. It turned to near to 17 to 80 billion, near to 42% decrease in the valuation. And the other thing is, like, as I said earlier, if the cash flow is not as strong, if the balance sheet is not so strong, definitely the company is going to get hit heavily. So one of them is, for example, this case, 2 or 3 things happened for Airbnb. they increase the cost, the operating cost, that increase the level of income, and then decrease the level of net profit. More hiring for security and privacy reason of their users, and checking the homeowners, and the other one is like going to the headquarters building and so on. So all of that operating costs went up and up in a way that today they are really on the verge of some serious issue. Hertz got bankrupt last week. Look, for the Airbnb, the business model is strong for sure. However, it's not clear what's going to happen to this company.
Yeah. They were not expecting this, at least, like, to cut off on everyone staying at home, nobody's renting, nobody's
exactly
buying.
So this is the same case. We can talk about airlines, restaurants, hotels, but Airbnb is one of the cases that is like very interesting to evaluate among the unicorn that turned to.
Yeah, because they were prepared for high growth actually from the platform. Yeah. And seeing that, I think also like one thing that popped in my mind is for example, Airbnb, they're failing, but at the same time, other digital platforms, for example, they're actually booming from the COVID. So, for example, Microsoft Teams, which grew about like 40% users in the first month. Like, I think there is also a demand shock from the other side, right?
Yeah, true. That's true. It's a very good point that you're mentioning. One of them is, for example, Zoom. We're using it, right?
Yeah.
Netflix went to our one night like quite high. In grocery shopping, for example, Instacart. It was a startup in United States mainly, and they went quite high. Walmart had the logistics; they had to activate it more, but it's home delivery basically. Amazon Fresh, they were very active, but then they made a lot of fortune out of this situation. Of course, those who are they adapted properly, they got hit less hit. Uber got hit a bit, I would say. I don't have the number, unfortunately, but yeah. It is not necessarily just a bad side of the coin. Anything that happened is like a coin, has the face and tail, right?
Yeah, exactly. We're seeing a lot of people losing jobs, but at the same time, if on a positive note, we can see that Amazon and every other logistic companies, they are ramping up their employment because they need that many people to handle the new demand that they're having.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely it's
about unemployment, things happens, but probably short term for the time being, because anyway, things are removing from one side, but there are new kind of startups would come, the new type of companies come, but there might be some lags there. These are the points that countries are taking care of, and they put the stimulus packages and so on. I personally expect like 2 or 3 trillion so far. The United States injected, Japan 1 trillion. And the European Union as well, near to 1 trillion, 700 so something. I personally expect United States would come with 1 or 2 more.
Wow.
As of January, as of June, when we see the Q2 reports.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. And also talking about the future, then what do you think about the new supply chain model that will come out of this crisis? Because we have seen that there's a lot of change. And what do you see then for the future?
Look, first and foremost, there are a couple of important points to consider. Number one is people, they would like to call it decent deglobalization. I personally would call it still globalization, but with some adjustment. Okay. I believe still globalization supports and help, but this needs some proper adjustment. Globalization was basically on the main idea of, yes, the byproduct of that was saving, cost cutting, but it was mainly on the way that we have collaboration and we work all together and we are around same pie and we care about productivity. These are positive, okay, points of it. As far as we do care about our nature as well, okay? But there are some adjustment here. For example, 50% of personal protective equipments are done like in US or UK or around the world, it's all done in China. So in case of the crisis, we had supply shock, and look what happened. So for example, for the face mask or surgical mask or N95, if we consider Honeywell and is a producer, and the cost of in the global model for Honeywell, for example, the cost is probably 50 centime or 60 max. I mean, for the end user, and the cost overall difference is low. But then if we consider this for a local model, which is like they, instead of offshoring, they bring like inshore, they have some reserve in the United States, or we have some reserve in Switzerland. I'm not talking about reserve as a stock, producing it here, definitely the cost would go 5 to 10 times more. Like we can expect to pay 5 to 7 for that. Does it worth? Good question. It's the cost that we pay for our security. So that brings me to the point that resilience gets on top priority now than efficiency. Efficiency is very important, but resilience of a supply chain is getting much more priority and importance. Then the redefining innovation for the supply chain, global supply, redefining the value chain. And what is value really? Is it resilience or efficiency? Based on the way, like the approach that we're taking, definitely there are going to be some changes there, such as reshoring. Reshoring is not something new. We had it there before. We had it for, that's funny. So we had it before for 2000, let's say 11, 12, after tsunami, after flood in Thailand, after volcano in Iceland. We had it like companies, they started to think about it, but let's be clear about that. It's not a matter of a day. And this is not a point that for all industries, automakers, high tech, it doesn't make sense for them to reshore it to somewhere else, or like to come out of the model, the current model that they are, or probably doesn't make sense for the time being. The second point, like for like heavily human intensive or for industries that need people to be involved there, like footwear, fashion, clothing, hospitality. So, these industries, they need, I would say, to think more about reshoring, and they've done it to some extent. Malaysia, or I would say Bangladesh, to Indonesia. So the Vietnam, they are doing it to some extent, but now it became more and more important. Look, it was a move of 15 or 20% of industries, let's say, of Western companies, and now it gets a bit more and in higher intensity, I would say. So that's the other point that it's important. Regional, let's say, hubs, it come as well. Original cluster, China for China, Europe, for example, Eastern Europe or Central Europe, they're just sending it the same as most of these corporates that are around us. They send their call center around, or ops centers or finance centers around to Portugal, to Poland, to Hungary, to some other countries. And that's the same case for United States and Canada. They send it to Mexico, they send it to Americas, basically. Some of these expensive activities. Automation plays a role there, but automation is still like one example, one of these technologies that we have, for example, 3D. Again, for PPE, personal protective equipment, we use that, but look, the output is not that high.
Yeah.
Okay. So automation is still, if we're going to consider, it is used, but it's not for mass production. You might ask, like, okay, look, tech industry, they're using it. Automakers, they're using it. Absolutely, I do agree. They use mass, but they have limited diversification, or they have limited variety of the products. But while we are talking about fashion industry, for example, while we're talking about clothing, footwear, the variety is huge. and automakers, they can, automation cannot really answer. One case, one example is Adidas, for example. Adidas they're pretty advanced in automation. They opened one factory in Germany, as far as I remember, and one in United States in Atlanta. After 2 years or so, they had to close that one because they couldn't make much variety out of that automated or fully automated factory. So we have still, to some extent, we are doing it. We cannot really go full-fledged there, but still, this is another factor that we can expect. What else I can bring it? I talked about reshoring as well, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so what do you think about one other aspect of this new supply chain? Because we've been talking a lot about digital transformation these recent years, and I heard you were quite a specialist at that. So in terms of digital transformation, for example, companies who were going for digital channels, etc., we have seen that a lot of companies, for example, going for online groceries, that's a new digital channel, and now it's booming. But for a lot of other digital tools, for example, it has become necessary, for example, for resilience. And companies who haven't caught up, who weren't on the train of digital transformation, are they kind of in a really bad spot right now, or could they adapt also out of this?
Well, my answer would be like a consultant would say, or a professor would say, it depends. Really depends to the industry and depends to the area location. Of course, it is very good to have to catch up with this journey of digital transformation. But digital transformation is not necessary for all, let's say, companies and all industries. One thing is, I don't know why we have that much surprise in in our lighting. So one thing here is that to answer your question, there is no single and clear roadmap here that we say, look, okay, first step, a company should go this way, second should go this, and third should implement this one. For example, we say like, first digitize, then digitalize, which is about the process, then go for digital transfer, full-fledged digital transformation. And then look, all of them for like blockchain and many other, let's say, nice technological initiatives. To embed in supply chain takes a lot of time. So we have things there, but some works in some way and some doesn't work. Like virtual reality works for some, let's say, beverage industry, like beverage companies, Pepsi, Cola, and Coca, and the other. But RFID doesn't work, for example, necessarily there. RFID work, as you see, for example, the case of Adidas, it works for Adidas and some other companies or some retailers. They take advantage of RFID, but for some other companies, 3D doesn't make sense. So we have to see in this situation what industry we are talking, or even region, and what markets they're serving. So overall, that's going to be the case, and it needs a bit of readiness to move, plus what type of technology they need. Because if we ask this, the third question would be, what is the best, like the return of investment for this technology?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I see. So going forward with this new supply chain, with this new life, new normal. So for companies, or even for countries, or for the world, what is needed for a successful recovery? Like, what is needed in terms of policies, for example, in terms of actions that companies must take for a successful recovery?
Look, if we talk about the company level, I would say, like, first and foremost, it's very important that they have a crisis team or a joint, let's say, task force group that senior executives definitely are among them. And then they map the value adding network for themselves. Then they constantly monitor what is coming, what is going. They have different scenarios. I've been in a couple of companies. I personally faced I haven't been in that port, but faced the explosion of the port in China. And we had some delay in our supply. and it was a product launch and some issues that we've personally we faced our group. So what is really effective here is just like monitoring the case and having best case scenario, mid case scenario, and worst case, which is scenario planning. And then task force group that they're gathering, monitoring the situation and knowing who's the supplier of the supplier of the supplier. So means mapping the whole value adding network and knowing the locations, knowing the capacities, being able to reserve some extra capacity or spare capacities. When we are mapping things that, for example, the logistic provider, carrier provider, it is not like having the full capacity, we can advance it. We can postpone some shipments, or we can reserve some capacities on the third tier so that we ensure that on the time, in the time that we are up or down and facing supply shock or demand shock, we can secure that. Look, this is not really, it's a constant journey, and it really needs a team that they have their boots, they tie their lace, and truly work day and night, 24/7, monitor the case, and ensure that this supply is going to happen. And this is not that different from firefighting. And of course, supply chains shouldn't be in a reactive mood, but this situation like Corona is very different. It's very different. So we need like professional firefighters, I would say, as supply chain
definitely.
leaders.
Like we need them to be active and everything.
Exactly.
To maybe reconsider the strategy, how they, but for companies, for example, who are, let's say, really hit financially by this crisis, for example, and they really need some cash flow. For example, they're struggling, a lot of companies are struggling, they're going bankrupt and everything. Is there an advice you would give them for the times that comes?
For the companies that are going bankrupt?
Not going bankrupt, but like in difficult situations.
The very important point is just staying on the strength. Very important point is just like seeing like what are the losses and then how they can recover, and having a scenario in a way that when they have to close the facility or when they have to replace it, like for example, outsource it, and they can just ensure that this time is in a way that it's aligned with their recovery. So that's a very important point to consider. So that comes out of that joint task force or the crisis team within the company.
Yeah.
It's very important to monitor the situation, and you cannot monitor the situation without knowing, let's say. And of course, investors that can help, the same as Airbnb, injecting 2 billion, for example. Investors definitely they can help. Short term, there might be difficult times on the salary, employment rate, or so on. But on a long term, definitely they can pass it. So it's a kind of bottleneck. And it really depends on the industry, and then the outlook of industry, the outlook of the business, and the location of the company as well. And their market.
And on a more national level, our audience has a very interesting question. Zineb was asking whether the fact that government have loosened up the sanitary restriction, do you think it's a good strategy? Because in a way, it has helped people consider less the danger of the virus, so they will go out more. But at the same time, it raised the number of cases because people go out more. So what do you think about this situation?
So if I just want to clarify, the question is about the lockdown or lifting up the lockdown?
Lifting up the lockdown.
Okay. The point is, look, somebody should pay the cost of lockdown. This lockdown easily, if we crunch the number, per month, 2 or 3 months that it was closed, United States injected around 3 trillion. So each month near to 1 trillion. More or less same case for France, Switzerland, Germany. So somebody should pay for it, right? Definitely there is a let's say, balance between the lockdown, safety of people, and economy. So some developed countries, they consider this one. Some other countries, they just eased up, or they haven't even gone to that extent, the same as Sweden, for example. And then rather they mainly worked on the social responsibility of their people. So now, is it a betrayal? No. From the governments? No. Because look, this is the same as AIDS now. We are living with it. I mean, hopefully nobody going to be infected, but it's on the personal responsibility and social responsibility that the person takes care of himself or herself, right? And until we have to reach to the vaccination or to vaccine and to reach to the drug, proper drug, that we go for treatment and prevention of the outbreak. Until to that point, we have to use the short-term solution that we were talking, which is like definitely social distancing and probably mid-term contact tracking. I don't see any more solution until we get to the vaccine.
Yeah, with contact tracking being the new things that really Switzerland and the other countries are testing to see if they can really stop the spread and like really cut the chains of transmission.
Mm-hmm.
And so Zineb has another question for you. It will be a constant process, you said. Can we really use the term recovery, because it's a constant process, and you really, I think she meant that you really never fully recover. So what do you think about the use of recovery in this case?
Look, there are many models right now. There are VWL, the soup of alphabet. But the main thing is, what I personally see is just like quite wide U, and we're not going to be back to the same level in a short run, let's say 1 or 2 years. It takes time to go up. Definitely, there are many players here. If we bang on the, we have to be together, and it's a collaborative game. If we're going to start to have the same as the game theory is prisoner dilemma, if we start to have the banging on the xenophobia to or racism or any other that, like, this is just deviation from the main problem that we need to put our attention and focus to solve it, right? And then we are all there. So blame game doesn't help. China did that, or United States did that, or other countries did that. Or recently I've heard that they are saying like the second outbreak in Beijing comes from, for example, salmon, and they put the Norwegian salmon on the list. Possible or not, I don't know. I don't have enough proof there. But look, it is very important to investigate properly and independently. But what is very important is just the problem to just we have a solution-oriented mindset rather than going to blame on the other. We have to reach to the point that collectively we accept the problem and accept what is, and then move on to towards solution and help each other. Look, one very important thing here is I would like to stress that we are all in this situation together, okay? So nobody is safe when somebody is infected. We are all in this situation. So it's very important to collaborate all together and then reach to some happy medium.
Yeah, it's definitely true. Also, like on the international level, I think countries where there are a lot of collaboration actually, for example, for the vaccine, like they are working all together, they're sharing information together between all the drug companies, all the pharmaceuticals. So definitely the collaboration is what we really need right now. So exactly. Going ahead in the next, let's say, 3 to 6 months. So with the policies that we have now, what do we expect to see concretely?
Tough question. I don't have any crystal ball, but I would say we will experience a lot of bankruptcies. This is first and foremost.
Yeah.
We will experience short-term unemployments. Different to short-term unemployment we see a kind of modification in the globalized supply chain or globalization. We definitely, these are the trends that we have seen it, a bit of reshoring, and definitely China knew that 4 years ago, 6 years ago, and they heavily invested 10 years ago or 15 years ago on their high tech, you see, and for their 5G, for example, they heavily considered their, let's say, domestic market. They knew that this is not going to be a long-term ticket that they can make money out of that. Definitely, still they are very efficient, but this reshoring is part of the plan that companies and countries are considering it more. Does that mean employment within the countries? No. If they're going to be reshored. To some level, yes, but overall, if we're going to get aggregate level, I don't think it's going to change much. But we will see more unemployment. So it's very important to have that countries, they work on the first safety and security of people. Second point is on the mental health. Very soon we will have some issues and this, because people, it touches the security of people, which is on the bottom line, like shelter, food, and so on. Probably universal income would be a topic to come up, probably in the presidential election and so on. In the United States, Andrew Yang was talking more about
exactly.
Possible that it comes again on the table, which is logical in my point of view. And if we are talking about social responsibility, it's better to really trust the nation and truly give the money to people, basic income money, so that they can cover their shelter and home and food. And this absolutely avoids revolt. This absolutely avoids social unrest and some other cases that we may see soon.
Well, as the saying goes, there's no better time to grow than during a crisis. And I think the world businesses, supply chains, they have learned a lot through this COVID crisis. Hopefully, it's really an opportunity for them actually to really change their models, see the weaknesses in their models, and really grow out of it and become more resilient and stronger for the future.
True. Nietzsche says, whatever doesn't kill me is going to make me stronger.
Exactly.
But unfortunately, we lost many people in this journey as well. So it's a kind of collective decision. And really, it's important to be acute and agile whenever we are dealing with national health or like public health. It's very important to go for oversupply, not under, oversupply, and truly caring about everything, all details, not just like partial coverage.
Yes, exactly, yes. Well, thank you very much, Amin, for your presence today. We are done. We don't have much time left, so let's conclude here. And thank you also for the audience for being there tonight. And we are honored to have you, Amin, today. Thank you. Hopefully we'll see you next time. And next time also for the audience, please stay tuned for our next events. Our next webinars will feature some very interesting people from the industries, and they will be very knowledgeable. They will have a lot of experience. So stay tuned, follow us on our socials, and let's see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Vijay. Stay safe. Ciao.
Ciao.